different definitions here. So first of all, this is we're using a transform of serverless. So this is like a template, a CloudFormation template, but it's more specifically a SAM template. So the first thing we're going to define is a DynamoDB table. This is, if you've defined DynamoDB tables before, this is quite straightforward. So this has nothing to do with Appsync. We're just making a DynamoDB table. And then we're going to create a role so that Appsync can do things to this DynamoDB table. What we're doing here is we have, first of all, a managed policy. And what we're going to say is we're going to allow all DynamoDB operations against this specific DynamoDB table, which is what we just defined. And so we're using some dynamic values here, which is going to make our life easier. So theoretically, we could deploy this in different accounts and it would all just work because we're getting these dynamic values. In my table, this corresponds to this thing right here. Okay, so that is great. So we have the DynamoDB table, we have the role defined. Now we get into Appsync. So we have, first of all, the Appsync API. And let's go back to our diagram here. We are talking about this box right here. Okay, perfect. So not a whole lot of config, right? It's just like we define this thing and then we define lots of things to apply to it. So in this case, we're saying authentication type is API key. Next, we're going to do the schema. And this is this box here. The API ID, this is how we assign it to this big block right here, the API app. Okay, next we're going to do the API key. That is this box right here. And we're going to set the expires date to a high number. And this is actually seconds is what that relates to. And then again, we're doing API ID. What does this relate to? So we have a bit of configuration. Where do I apply this to? We're going to apply it to this box right here. So this thing right here, and we can see that we're getting the attribute this, and we're diving in to get the ID because that's what it's asking for. Okay, and then finally, we're going to do the data source, and we only have one in our scenario. So again, API ID, what are we applying this to? We're applying this to this box right here. So we're defining this data source and applying it to this box. And we're going to give it a name. You can give it whatever name you want. We're going to give it a type of AWS DynamoDB. This does matter. This is not anything. We are saying it is this type. So this can be anything, but this is a specific type. And we're going to give it a role. And so this role that we defined, let me just double click this. So this role that we created, we're going to be applying as a service role on. And DynamoDB config, we're going to, so this data source resource is actually going to be applied to a real thing, which is our table, which is this thing right here. Okay, so basically we have everything except our resolvers. And I feel like in a lot of cases, this is kind of how it goes. It's like you define all your configuration up here, but then when it comes to like start developing and adding features and so on, the resolvers is what you continually are adding and creating lots of. So that's why I sort of given it its own separate section. So in the resolver get, we have so this is type resolver, depends on the schema. And the properties, we're going to apply it to the API ID. So for everything that we do, we're always sort of attaching it to that big box right here. And we're going to say query of note. So we're defining in the schema, what are we connecting to? And if we look at the schema here, we have a query note. So I'm just going to define, it's either a query or mutation. You can do subscriptions as well, but we're just doing query and mutation. And we're going to select that field. Okay, so what data source are you going to be operating against? And we don't specify the actual table here. We specify the data source that we created. So we're going to say this is the data source we're going to be connecting to. And then we have the request mapping template. So let's just skip that for a second because that's kind of most of the work that we're going to be doing is around that. But let's just take a look at all the other ones and we'll notice a pattern. So we got resolver get, resolver list. Similar sort of thing. Everything is exactly the same. We have query but notes. We're attaching this to a different field. Same data source. Resolver create, we're doing mutation create, and if we look at that, we can say mutation create, and so on, and so update and then and delete. So this is a pattern you're going to notice. Now the thing that's different about all of these is this spot here. This is how we define the, if we go down to our image right here, we define what are we doing on this data source. In this case, I'm going to get an item, and I'm going to pass in the ID from my arguments, and we're just going to, so this would be the input, this is the output, where we're going to pull out, and we're just going to pull out the content. So what we're seeing here is VTL. This is a very deep topic that should be done in a different video because it's very, very deep. But basically, when you look at stuff like this, we got operation get item, we got operation scan, we have operation put item. Does this sound familiar? If you've looked at the AWS SDK, let's just take a quick look at that. And we scroll down to the different methods here. We'll notice a similarity here. So we got get item. Let's see what we had there. Get item. We have scan. We have put item. And all of these things correspond to those SDK methods. So if you've worked with the DynamoDB SDK before, this is going to be easier to get into because it maps quite well to those things. Okay, so let's go ahead and deploy this thing. So I'm going to run sam build, then I'm going to run sam deploy guided, so it gives me an opportunity to pass in some sort of arguments. In this case, I've set it up so that, just take a quick look at the end of the template. I have an API name that I'm going to give it. So I'm going to say Appsync example. Let's do US East 1, that's fine. Appsync example, and change it before. Yeah, I'm good with that. Allow, yes. Yes. So now it's going to go ahead and do its thing. So you might get this where it's failed because it's complaining about capability named IAM. So I made a note of this in the README as well. Let's go into the sam config.toml. So basically what it's saying is we are giving a named IAM permission here. We're defining a IAM resource in here and giving it a name. So we need to just configure that in our sam toml here. And we're basically just confirming, yes, we know that we're creating this IAM resource. That's basically the purpose of that. It's just an explicit way of saying, I want to be able to create this named IAM resource. So let's go through it again. Oh, what? Okay, sorry about that. You know what? I'm going to not do the guided thing this time because I already have this toml file. So the guided flag basically allows, if you don't have a toml file, it allows you to, create it in the CLI. But in this case, I wanted this. I already have one, so I don't want to do the guided. Okay, great. So it's saying everything that's going to add. Let's go ahead and say yes to that. And it's going to take a bit of time. So this is using CloudFormation to build all these things. So it's going to give us the progress. And if there's an error at any point, it's going to roll everything back, which is great because I don't want to create all that logic myself. That's what's so good about, one of the things that's so good about CloudFormation.